Lego is the best toy ever created, and arcade games are just fun. Can you see where I'm going with this? About a year ago, I made an arcade racing game, and it did really well for my channel. Let's do it again, but better. Because I don't want to do the exact same thing over again, my idea for this one is to have a flight simulator game where you fly sideways, you can make your plane go up and down. It's hard to explain, you'll see what I mean. By putting treads on their sides, I can use Technic pins to clip in these pieces, and that gives me a solid foundation to build terrain on for the plane to fly over. But for this even to be possible to play, I need to gear down the biggest motor that is turning all of this tread so that it's slow enough that you can actually have time to think. Then, by hooking up a second smaller motor to an infrared receiver to a battery box, I can connect it to this controller, which will be the joystick to control your plane. It's complicated mechanism time. I don't like complicated mechanism time. There's also a huge problem. I'm going to hook the battery box upside down above the treads so that when the plane hits something, it's connected and turns everything off. But the switch is underneath the battery box, so there's no way to connect the switch to the plane without restricting movement of the plane. Turns out if you subscribe, I'll be happy. I mean, if I just turn the battery box on its side, it solves all my problems. Well, actually it doesn't. I spent the next 2 hours trying to figure out how to make a mechanism work, and finally got something that worked. But at this point, I only have 2 days left to finish this. This could actually become a real Lego set, so I really need to get going. But with mostly all of the mechanical parts of this build out of the way, I could get back into my comfort zone and start making things look good. I spent the next hour designing terrain for the plane to fly over, and after that was done, all I had to do was put it on. But that proved to be a lot harder than I thought. Because of how top-heavy the whole tread structure was, if I sat it upright, I was afraid that it would all tip over and break. But I managed to get it on with barely any breaking, and with that done, it was basically the moment of truth. If these pillars I had built were not strong enough to push the plane backwards and shut the machine off, there was no way I could compactly strengthen them to fit within the confines of this entire machine. So if this didn't work, then it was all for nothing. But to my surprise, it actually worked. But because all of this took so long, I took the popular phrase quality over quantity to heart and gave myself an extra week to work on this build because there was no way I was finishing this on time. And before I started building the outer shell to make everything look good, there was one final detail I needed to add to make this game a little bit harder. I'm gonna add a couple clouds along the path at the lower points so that you have to actually go up and down to avoid obstacles. And after adding that and a black backdrop behind everything just so it was a little less distracting, all I had to do was make it look pretty and it was ready to be played. Because of how big this thing is actually turning out, I decided that I'm not going to submit it to LEGO Ideas because it's just not something they would consider. But after a bunch of trial and error, I went with a gray look for this entire model and ran out of pieces. So it only looks good from the front, but I'm only going to show it to you from the front, so it doesn't matter. To make it a little brighter, I added a yellow ring around the screen area, put a little speedometer on the side, and with all of that done, it worked, it looked good, and now it's time to actually play the game. So if I push this lever, it activates the joystick. So now the plane will go up and down. And when I push this forward, it will activate the plane. That worked well. So there's a little airport in there, and I ended up hitting the other plane. So it turns out this game is actually a lot harder than I anticipated. But here's how it works. This is probably the most electronic-y stuff I've ever used in a mock, and it was actually fairly complicated to make. It all starts with this battery box, which is turned on by this little beam that sticks out onto the side of the build. This is connected to an infrared receiver that's connected to this motor and to this controller, so when you turn the controller back and forth, it makes the motor go up and down and makes the plane go up and down. Then there's a second battery box which is connected to this motor in the back, which turns the whole tread structure. And when I press this little lever sticking out on this side, it turns on the motor so that everything starts turning and then you can actually play the game. And when you hit something, it pushes the battery box lever one step back, which shuts everything off. This took an extremely long time to build, and it's my first video in 2022. More amazing things coming. I really want to make this year count and just upload a lot of good stuff. So if you're with me, please consider subscribing and liking. It's all I can ask.